Boxing has a deeper and richer history than any other sport, and each era brings its own style, its own rivalries, and its own legends who define the sport for generations to come. Today, we count down the 7 greatest eras in boxing history, from grainy black and white footage to ultra 4K video. Let's take a journey through time to see which era left the most lasting impact on the sweet science. Hey, welcome back, fight fans. Today, we will be traveling through over 100 years of boxing history. We're going to break it down into individual eras and rank them and see which was the greatest time to be a boxing fan. I've ranked these eras based on the fighters that dominated them, the fights that defined them, and how culturally relevant boxing was at the time. Of course, this is very subjective, so leave your list down below and let's get the conversation going. But let's not waste any more time, guys. Let's dive straight in. At number 7, we have the 2000s, an age when boxing's lighter weight division shone the brightest. You had the relentless Manny Pacquiao becoming an 8-division world champion, the defensive wizardry of Floyd Mayweather, who retired 50-0, Bernard Hopkins, who made history by becoming the oldest world champion in history, and also you had the British icon Joe Calzaghe, who made his mark by dominating the super middleweight division, retiring undefeated, and also taking on some of the best names across the Atlantic. And although the 2000s delivered some legendary fights and legendary fighters, I can't rank it any higher here, as the glamour division of boxing, the heavyweights, was probably in its worst era in history at this point. So despite the brilliance of the smaller guys, the absence of a strong heavyweight scene in this era definitely holds it back from reaching its full potential. Now coming in at number 6, we have the current era. Often underrated, but it is home to some legendary undisputed champions. We got 4 in total in Alexander Usyk, Terence Crawford, Naoya Inoue, and Canelo Alvarez, all of whom are guaranteed Hall of Famers, and I'm sure once they all retire and their careers have a few years to marinate, they will be talked about in the same breath as legends of the past. And with Saudi Arabia's heavy financial backing, boxing appears to be entering into a modern-day golden age, giving us 2 undisputed matchups that will go down in the history books just this year alone. So for now at least, it looks like boxing is in good hands, and I definitely believe the current era deserves a spot on this list. Now at number 5, we have the 1990s, an era where the heavyweight division experienced somewhat of a renaissance. Packed with world-class talent, it culminated in an undisputed clash between Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield, but the guys just beneath them were equally amazing as well. You had Mike Tyson, Riddick Bowe, Tommy Morrison, Ray Mercer, and a returning George Foreman, who became the oldest heavyweight champion in history when knocked out Michael Moorer, if not one of the best heavyweight divisions in history without doubt. And while the heavyweights did take center stage, you had legends like Roy Jones Jr., Pernell Whitaker, and Ricardo Lopez dominating the lighter divisions as well. A truly all-time great era in boxing, and it only doesn't rank higher because of the sheer brilliance that is ranked above it. So now at number 4, we have the 1940s, an era which is defined by 3 of the greatest fighters to ever lace up a pair of gloves. You got Joe Louis, Sugar Ray Robinson, and Willie Pep. Joe Louis dominated the heavyweights, defending his title for over a decade, while you had Ray Robinson dominating the middle divisions to a point where he is even today considered the greatest pound-for-pound boxer ever. Meanwhile, Willie Pep ruled the lighter divisions, carving out a legacy as possibly the greatest defensive boxer of all time. The 1940s also possibly had the greatest chin of all time in Jake LaMotta, and you also had young up-and-comers like Archie Moore and Ezra Charles, who would go on to dominate the following decade. The 1940s was about pure grit. You had legends fighting each other regularly, despite the impact of World War II, meaning you had many years during this era where boxing couldn't even take place. So the fact that this era is still ranked so highly is just a testament to the legends that dominated this era. Coming in at number 3 with our very first place on the podium, we have the 1910s, Now, the 1910s was brutal and it was often defined by racial barriers. Jack Johnson, the first ever black heavyweight champion of the world, kicked off the decade by defeating the great white hope Jim Jeffries in the infamous fight of the century. But Jack Johnson definitely wasn't the only legend to be carving out a legacy at this time. This was an era of unprecedented brilliance in abundance. You had legends like Sam Langford and Harry Wills, who were kept from world titles due to racial discrimination, but are still known to this day over 100 years later as some of the greatest fighters to ever fight, despite not picking up a world title. You also have pound for pound legends like Harry Greb and Benny Leonard breaking records at this time as well. And not to mention, you also had Jimmy Wild, the greatest lightweight of all time, doing his thing in this era as well. It's actually insane how stacked with legends the 1910s was. In an era where you had Hall of Famers fighting each other multiple times a year, and boxing was probably the most popular sport on earth at this point, there is no way to deny that this legend-stacked era deserves its place in the top three. Taking our silver medal today, we got the 1980s. The 1980s was defined by a peak middleweight division. The four kings ruled this era in Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Tommy Hearns, and Roberto Duran. Each king brought their own unique style to the ring, meaning that every single battle between these four was an instant classic, especially Hagler Hearns, which is looked at still to this day as possibly the most entertaining boxing match to ever happen. Outside the middleweights, Larry Holmes carried the heavyweight division through the majority of the decade with possibly the greatest jab in boxing history. Then towards the tail end of the decade, you had a prime Mike Tyson who shook the world by becoming the youngest heavyweight champion in history. This era was all about explosive talent and iconic rivalries that defined boxing for generations to come. Before I give you my top spot, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to some honorable mentions that were very unlucky to miss out. We got the 1960s, the 1920s, and the 1930s. All of these had their legends and their iconic battles and were very unlucky to miss out, but I just wanted to give a bit of recognition to them regardless. So now we got that out the way, guys. Let's find out which is the greatest era in the history of boxing. Finally, at number one, we have the 1970s, boxing's golden era. This era was defined by the three heavyweight superstars at the time, Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, and George Foreman, all three of whom transcended the sport to become cultural icons, and all three taking part in three of the most iconic fights in the history of sport in general. Fight of the Century, Rumble in the Jungle, and Thriller in Manila. All three of these fights transcended the sport and are still talked about to this very day. But the 70s wasn't just about the heavyweights either. You also had possibly the greatest lightweight of all time and the greatest middleweight of all time, Roberto Duran and Carlos Monzon, ruling their divisions with iron fists. The fighters in this era brought an intensity, skill, and sheer heart that made boxing feel like it was more than just a sport. It was pure spectacle, a golden age that still remains unmatched to this very day. So that is my list of my top 7 eras in boxing history. Now, I have no doubt that your guys' lists are going to be vastly different. So put it in the comments below. I will be reading all the comments and it'll be really interesting to see how many people agree or disagree with me. But yeah, for now, if you like the video, hit the like button, hit the sub button to help the channel out, help it grow, and to be notified for all the great boxing content we got coming up very soon, guys. But until then, peace.